Welcome to Real Talk, where we dive into the raw, engaging, authentic, and lived experiences that inspire and inform. I'm Michelle Badusky, your host, and I believe that the hardest conversations to have are the ones we need the most. This is a safe space for real talk that challenges perspective, sparks growth, and pushes boundaries. No filters, no fluff, just real talk. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Hey everyone, it is Michelle Badusky here with Real Talk, and I am super excited about this podcast for coming to you today because I'm joined by Chris Hunt, who is someone that I have been talking politics with for years now. Now, before you start freaking out and think this is a political show and that there's a campaign, or that's not what this is. This is a nonpartisan discussion about how government's formed, how parties work, no campaigning involved. So, Chris, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
We've been talking about this for a long time. So, I know you are a super humble guy. So, I was going to have you introduce yourself and, talk about your credentials and tell people why they should listen to you as an expert on this subject. But I know you kind of wouldn't do that. So, I'm going to do it for you.
Okay.
Now, you have a Bachelor of Political Science from Brennan University, a master's degree in political science from U of M, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Plus, you've sat on tons of panels. You've worked with the Canadian Armed Forces as a reservist. You are now a PhD student who is working on international relations, involved in politics and the political sphere. So you're an expert on this.
Well, I appreciate hearing all that laid out. Yes, I have been around the block a few times, and I don't know if you were going to be shy to say this. Let's just say I have also worked on some partisan campaigns, federally and provincially. And on that federal side, to keep it back to that nonpartisan piece, I've done that for two different parties that have formed government. So I'll leave that as an exercise to the listener or the reader if they can figure out what that means. So I've seen a few different views here, anyways.
Well, and I think it's important because everybody knows me and everyone who follows me knows that I'm not exactly non-biased when it comes to politics, but I'm also not loyal to any party. I'm loyal to values and ethics and results. And you and I have had some amazing political discussions on policy and parties over the years. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we're on the opposite spectrum, but it is always respectful and always informative. And I've learned so much from you. And I'm hoping today that we can shed some light on some questions that keep coming up when it comes to campaigns and elections. That's the goal here today.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that. I think it's always best when you have those constructive debates as well. I think steel sharpens steel, so I've always appreciated the pushback you give me, and it usually lets me think about it, change my mind, or come back and say, nope, I'm actually 1,000% sure now.
And you know what? You've changed my mind on a few things too over the years because I have great respect for your education and your expertise in these areas. And that's why I needed to have you here. Because when I talk about these things, it always sounds like I'm trying to forward an agenda. But my real only agenda is to create an informed electorate, right? People who get out and not just vote, but understand what they're voting for and why. And one of the things, and you and I talked about this a few years ago, one of the things that astounds me is how confused people are about the different levels of government. And when we have an election, we have a provincial or federal election, they're not always 100% sure who and what they're voting for. And, that's not about, I don't want to get into parties and people, but I think it's really important we talk about that. So I'm going to just start off by saying, there are 4 levels of government in Canada. One is Indigenous self-government, and we are not going to be discussing that today because neither one of us is qualified to be discussing Indigenous
I'm absolutely not an expert of that. No, absolutely not.
and I don't think we have any business talking about that, and that is not what we are that's not what the general population is voting and participating in anyways. So what we are going to be focusing on today is federal and provincial government and policies. And then there's also municipal. And before I'm going to let you take over, I'm just going to say we probably don't need to touch much on municipal. Municipal elections are all nonpartisan. Mayors, councillors, reeves, they don't subscribe to the party system. It is literally individuals running for their community at that level, and whoever gets the most votes wins, right? Like that's just how it is. So I'm going to throw this out there. Softball, start us off. What's the difference between provincial and federal government and how they're formed?
Well, the first thing I want to tell you, Michelle, is that, and for everyone listening, is that if you feel confused by this, cut yourself a huge amount of slack because it is actually very confusing. It does say in the Constitution who's responsible for what, how it's supposed to work. I'm sure we all, if you went to middle school, high school in Canada, you would have learned all this stuff. But it is actually way more confusing when you dig under the hood here, right? And so we can get into that a little bit. But first of all, I just want to have people cut some slack here that it is sometimes hard to understand for a couple of reasons. There's the fact that as our governments evolve and do more things, it gets messier. And the other thing too we have to say is, like them, hate them, or both, the United States being such a huge force economically, and TV, radio, movies, all that kind of stuff, it bleeds up here and it makes it even more confusing. So first off, everybody who's watching at home, if you don't know this, you're not a bad person. If you're listening to this, you're taking the first step to learn more, and so cut yourself some slack. When it comes down to it, both of our levels here that we're talking about, the federal and provincial, they look pretty similar in terms of how they are elected. But what the biggest difference is their portfolio, and I mean that both in where that they're responsible for and what they're responsible for. So your federal government, that's for all of Canada, the Parliament in Ottawa, Prime Minister, all those great departments that we know and love. They have the jurisdiction over all of Canada, but not in every portfolio or every aspect of government. So the Constitution does lay out which areas that the federal government takes the lead on. And that's things you might imagine make sense. Diplomacy, defense, things like banking, because it crosses across all of the country. Things like anything that crosses those provincial territorial borders. That's what they're primarily responsible for. They also raise a ton of money because of their ability to tax the whole country. When we look at provincial, they of course have jurisdiction within their province. So Manitoba, that's the Manitoba government, and they take the lead on things like healthcare, education, resource extraction, their highway system, those aspects. And like we touched on a little bit in terms of municipal, we won't need to talk about that too much, but I do want to say I have a ton of respect for municipal leaders because that's where politics really does happen. And if your garbage isn't getting picked up, it's not glamorous, but it causes a huge problem right away. So big thank you to everyone who puts themselves forward for municipal politics and gets that done. But the municipal government layer actually belongs to the provinces as well, where I'm joining you from Brandon here, and Brandon is a creation of the Manitoba government. So it is sort of provincial but delegated down. So those are the two big areas that we can look at. Where is their jurisdiction and what is their jurisdiction in terms of the departmental portfolios? But what I alluded to before, and I'll pause to throw it back to you here, is that gets a little messy when we talk about something like healthcare. So healthcare is for sure a provincial responsibility, but a ton of money comes in to the provinces through transfer payments from the federal government because they can raise so much funds. And we do see more recent legislation as we expect more from governments coming into areas of either transferring those funds in and having some strings attached because they want to make sure that there is a equality of services across all areas in Canada from the federal government, but also in terms of providing additional programs that get into healthcare type areas as well. So if you're getting confused at home, that's understandable. And another one I'll toss out there is the environment, for example, where resource extraction, emissions, control, pollution control, that it has a provincial aspect to it and a federal aspect where ideally the two levels need to be working together. And sometimes that becomes politicized. And so that becomes challenging. So again, you can see how by the book, these areas are split up, but in practice, they start to blur at the edges as well.
Well, and thank you for, clarifying that because it really is important for people to understand that it is complicated, it is confusing, and I think too with social media, and I've said this a million times, social media is supposed to be a really great tool that gives us a world's full of education at our fingertips, but it's also being used as a weapon to politicize issues that aren't necessarily political, or we have propaganda, and and it comes from all sides. Like this isn't it just it's what I'm trying to get at is it makes it even more confusing to figure out who to believe and who to trust when it comes to politics and policy. So in a nutshell, like you said, the municipal, federal, and provincial governments are all separate, but they're also all intertwined, and they need to be able to work together for the benefit of their people. So, can you break it down for me? So, in a provincial election, we have we have our local riding seats, and we elect our local representative to sit in the legislature in Manitoba. That's here in Manitoba, but every province and territory has their own version. So we elect our local representative here in Manitoba. It's an MLA, a member of the Legislative Assembly, and they go to Winnipeg, represent our community, and together those 58 people make decisions that affect provincial policy.
And how you described very well how each person, you're in a particular electoral district or riding, we call them. So I'm here in Brandon East. It's on the east end of Brandon. Sometimes the names are creative, sometimes they're less so. And so you have a member of the Legislative Assembly you vote for, and then they head on down to Winnipeg and the Ledge, and they're one of, as you noted, 57 individuals who are representing our views here. What the biggest misconception folks have is whether it's provincial or federal, I think is the view that because we've become very leader centric, both
Mhm.
provincially, the premier and the leader of the opposition as two contrasting options, federally between the prime minister and the leader of the opposition as two contrasting options, we sometimes can get into a view where we're voting for the leader when, at least by the letter of the law and by the system, you're voting for your representative who you want to send and represent your interest in the legislature. So, yep, you got that right, but it does get
Except I was wrong
confusing
on
where,
something. I said 58 seats, and it's actually 57. So thank you for correcting me. I should know that. I do know that, but there you go. So that we see that a lot, and people think that they're voting for the leader of the party, and they kind of forget that that's not who they're voting for. So explain to me how that party system works.
yeah, so parties do a lot for us. Political science would say that there's a function or a utility to them. It's funny, here's a little weird tidbit I'll share with people. Parties weren't always thought to be such an important part of the electoral process. I'll borrow from the United States for a second. And originally, could you believe this? The original way they picked a vice president was whoever got the second most votes was the vice president, because they figured, well, it's the runner-up, they should be after that. So that clearly that did not have
If
a party in
anybody's watched
mind.
Hamilton, they know that. If anyone's watched
Well, good.
Hamilton,
They should. That's a great. I'm not going to call it documentary, but it's about as historically accurate as any historical movie usually is. So it's a good start of your Wikipedia binge. So the idea with the parties is that it gives some sort of order to the chaos. You can imagine in terms of even our legislature, 57 people. It's a real honor to be a member of the Legislative Assembly because you're one of 57 folks who are advocating for the direction that you want your province to take, and that's a huge responsibility. But even in the case of the federal House of Commons, you and I don't know the number off the top of my head. Unfortunately, it used to be 338. It's more now, a little less, but still, it starts to be a very rambunctious group of people. So if you can't align it in some way that makes sense, you would always be constant wheeler dealing. You wouldn't really know exactly what everyone stands for. We did just sit down and list every issue exactly where you stand. So there is real utility from the idea of here is the flavor, the brand, the set of assumptions, the policy platform that you're going to get with the local tailoring and trusting the member will bring your views forward. So that's the usefulness of a party to say, okay, well, we look at our last, we had a by-election recently nearby, and we had three parties on offer, three candidates as well. And so without having to get to know the candidate fully, you want to get to know your candidate, but you also have a sense of they've chosen to align with the New Democrats. That comes with a couple different policy ideas. It comes with support for the leader of that party, who happens to be the premier, and it comes with sort of an ideology there. The Progressive Conservatives, on the other hand, same idea. You have alignment with a leader of opposition of a certain profile, and again, certain policies and priorities and an ideology that helps to be a quick hand. Where the danger becomes, though, is if you start to see all these issues then politicized along this adherence to party and adherence to the leader, that it drowns out the local voice of what the individual member can do. And so the question then becomes, are you voting for just someone to fill a bum in a seat to be another vote to go along with whatever the party leader and the party ideology is? Or are you getting somebody who authentically aligns with that, but has some differences and will advocate for that? Unfortunately, I will say that in Canada, we have really moved towards centralizing a lot of the influence, whether it's provincially or federally, along with what the leader wants. And then the democracy kind of happens in terms of the battle between the parties and the battle inside the party for who the leader is. And so it is still democratic, but the ability for you to really kind of go off script is limited. With that said, though, I can think of a number of both provincial and federal legislators who have staked out a name for themselves in terms of pushing against it, either calling it out or strategically not echoing statements, being absent. And there are things you can do to push the boundaries.
Well, I
So
think
that's again, I think
that
where that
speaks to the
confusion
importance
comes
of.
from. There's how it works on paper, and that is still true, but there is that extra layer of being so leader and party focused.
And I do think that that speaks to the importance of your local candidates because I, for one, want someone who's going to speak truth to power, even if it is coming from their own party. I do not want to, elect someone that's just going to be told what to say and told what to do. I want them to be a voice. And that takes a lot. That takes a lot of character and integrity at the local level to be a candidate that's willing to do that. Um, it doesn't always work that way. We've seen it where the best candidate isn't always, the one that's elected, and that comes down to campaigning and issues that way. But that's why I wanted to do this podcast and talk about how this actually works so that people can get informed and make informed decisions. And I think that's really important, regardless of who you vote for, that you know why and how the system works and what you're getting for it. And while you were speaking there, I just quickly took a look, and the new number of seats in the House of Commons in the federal government is 343, and that's just because they moved some boundaries around. Now, unlike the states, like the states, I think sometimes, and you nailed it there, we watch so much American politics, news coverage that Canadians often think that our government forms the same way, that, that we work the same way, and that's not true. Our ridings and our constituencies are based on population, which is why, you often hear the West say that their votes don't matter, but they absolutely do because you're not voting for prime minister and you're not voting for premier. You're voting for your local representative and whatever party that representative, you know, um, belongs to, whichever party gets the most local people elected, if they have the majority, they form government. And if they have the most, but not the majority, they form a minority government. And then that party chooses their leader. So unless you live in the riding of the premier or the riding of the prime minister, you're not actually voting for them. You're not voting for Mark Carney. You're not voting for Bob Canoe. You're voting for your local representative. And I think that's something people forget or just aren't aware of it because of so much party influence and how important leadership has become because those are the ones we see in the news all the time. We see Mark Carney, we see Bob Canoe, we see Pierre Poilievre, we see Jagmeet Singh, but we rarely see our local representatives unless they really get out there and put themselves forward. And I wish I saw more of that from every party. I really did. I wish I saw MPs and MLAs really getting out there and voicing their thoughts and their opinions and not just being echo chambers to the party.
Yeah, and if I could hop in there, two really good points spring to mind from what you said. Firstly, is that thank goodness our system is insulated against the politicization of the electoral process. I think we have, listen, it can always be improved, but we have one of the fairest systems, I think, when it comes to determining how many seats we have, what those boundaries are. They try to balance making sure it's equal number of people, but also balancing are there geographical, cultural reasons to block together to create a coherent electoral district that makes sense. So you don't see those bizarre strips and exclusion that you see when you have a highly politicized and gerrymandered system. So that's when there's extensive partisan politics that goes into determining what seats are set up what way to create electoral advantage to whoever is in power. And we can see that extensively in the United States, unfortunately. So the fact that's set as an independent commission, the fact that the electoral system is run by whatever level of government is being elected. There's an independent body. So for the provincial election here in Manitoba, we've got elections in Manitoba. We have elections Canada in for the federal side of the House. Very strict regulations. I'll toss out as well the financial limits of how much you can contribute provincially or federally are very low. There's still lots of money in politics, but far, 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 far less, and far, far, far less influence of outside groups, whether that be corporations or unions, on both sides of the spectrum there, much, much more limited than what you'd see in some other areas. So that's a good thing. The other thing I would say on the topic of the leader centrality and the influence of the individual member is that, there's in one way that's working as intended because our system is set up to create stability. So we have a first past the post system where we try and create a clear winner. And you can look at the equal vote folks who say that we should have more proportional setup. And I'm partial to some of those arguments. But the way it is set up that way is so that you have a clear winner, you have a clear person who is your member for the riding. And a particular party does have the opportunity to form government to create that stability that allows us to actually govern, and then you have a clear choice to switch it around next time. So that's one thing. I will say also, though, that there is actually a lot of room for some MPs to really push the limits. I think of Michael Chong of the Conservatives, for example, a number of Liberals from out east around protecting their economic interests around oil heating and the current realities versus climate change. I don't want to get into the specifics of the policies, but we saw them speaking for that. And also internally, it's something called caucus, which some folks might not be aware of, but caucus just means a group. And so when we say that in Canadian politics, we usually mean the party caucus. So every member of whatever level it is, so the legislature here in Manitoba or the House, every member of a particular party, they get together. It's behind closed doors, and that's supposed to be a session where they can hammer it out and fight in private, then be on the same team. So your member has the opportunity to say, and they should be speaking their mind in caucus, so that the leadership team hears them and can change course. And some members are better than others in that regard.
And that goes back to what I've said, and you and I have had this discussion so many times about the quality of candidates, who we put forward, who steps up to run, and how important that ability to articulate themselves and defend their people, right? Like this is our representative. So I live in the provincial riding of Spruce Woods, and our MLA speaks for us and our community, and for what's it's supposed to be what's best for us as a community, not what's best for the party. But do you find that somehow that's kind of slipping, or am I just like overly biased here and looking at things kind of jaded?
Well, I mean, yes, I think it depends. So uh, often the problem is sometimes the member becomes the spokesperson for the party message or the party leader, and that's not what you want to see. You want to see somebody who will take your concerns seriously, regardless of if you voted for them or not, regardless of if their party's in power or not, and advocate for that. And there are members who are very effective at that,
Hmm.
and there are members who choose to be more just like a spokesperson, and that's a tough one. Our system is really, in a lot of ways, based on conventions of good conduct. I think it was written, it's a bit sexist to say it's gentlemanly conduct. And so I think we could just maybe change that to trying your best, being a good person,
Yep.
and like trying to play the game the way it's supposed to be played. Because, for example, think about the premier's office or the prime minister's office. That doesn't exist in the Constitution. If you look at the Constitution, all of the executive authority of any level of government in Canada, whether provincially or federally, it comes from the Crown, the King of Canada, and it's exercised by ministers based on a lot of unwritten rules. And so those are really depending on there being vigorous debate, being caucus, and also for folks who are ministers, even more so within cabinet or executive council, which is what we call the cabinet of ministers in the provincial context, getting together around the table in secret. And it should be a raucous debate. The minutes of that only come out very sanitized, like 60 or 70 years later. So you can go find Pierre Elliott Trudeau's cabinet meetings, and they're very thin in terms of what was discussed, but you can see a vigorous debate being had there. And that's the only way it works. If we just listen to the leader only, you're going to go astray. And then we'll create a situation where we have a veneer of democracy, but it's ultimately sort of an elective dictatorship. And we want to avoid that and make sure those good ideas are being raised from all quarters. So that's what we need in terms of a local member. Like, listen, your member is not going to be able to do whatever they want, or they'll find themselves kicked out of the party. But there is a sweet spot where they align with the party they agree with, and they provide vigorous debate internally. And on a couple of issues, if it's something strong for them, they can speak off brand if they're not in the cabinet. There is a convention where if you're in the cabinet, you have to stand with the prime minister because it's unity of cabinet. You all get together, discuss it, debate it, and once it's set, you can either stand with the government. When we say government, we mean the party that's in power and the cabinet. And if you disagree, you got to leave. And so again, another person that pops to mind is federally Michael Chong, who was a minister under Stephen Harper. The Harper government viewed Quebec as a nation within a nation. They wanted to put forth that idea. His view, which is, I don't want to speak too much for him, but if I remember it correctly, is along the lines of as an immigrant, he views all Canadians being equal. And so he left the government to become just a backbench MP. Backbench just meaning any member of parliament who is not on the front benches, which is where you put the ministers, or on the opposition side, the critics, the folks who are
And we've seen in
specifically, it's person to person, like basketball, where you have a critic who's criticizing a bigger file.
Well, and I've got a couple points there. So, one, we've seen multiple times where party members, like elected MLAs or MPs from all parties, have left their party and sat as independents, which means they no longer agree with the direction that their party's going and they choose not to associate with them, or they've, for whatever reason, been kicked out of the party. We've seen that. We've seen elected members cross the floor, which means they've like joined another party. They're like, this party no longer aligns with my values. I don't like what they're doing. I'm going over here and joining that party. And it's interesting because you elect someone, let's say you elect your member and they are a liberal and they cross the floor and now they're a conservative. I don't know if I've ever seen that happen, but let's just say it happens. You still have the same member of parliament. They just represent a different party. And that's where people need to realize they're voting for individuals with individual views, individual power, individual responsibility, and they're not voting for a party. So that kind of caught me when you said that. The other thing I was thinking of is some people might hear what you said and be very scared. It's like, what do you mean the caucus debates in secret? Why is it secret? And I think it's really important to address that it's kind of like if you've ever been on a board, a volunteer board. Not everything is public. Not everything can be discussed public. Not every discussion and debate can be broadcast over social media. Even at the municipal level, you can go to a town council meeting and you can be privy to that meeting, but they will go in camera, which means it's not open to the public and not publicly available to discuss things of privacy, of public public privacy matters, staffing, individual things that really are, in a government's case, you're talking about security, you're discussing finance, that kind of thing. So I think that's really important to address, and just put it out there that this isn't like a secret coalition of like the Illuminati or anything. It's just that they go in there, they hammer out all their differences, and then they come out as a united front, which is what we want in a government, in leadership, right?
Yeah, I think the point you raised there is a really interesting one. It's about the ability, the it's not a secret cabal deciding these things. The fact there is cabinet secrecy and caucus secrecy is designed to allow the members and the ministers to share their views freely, because you can imagine how, and rightly so, the press is there to find information and put it out there and show what's happening. But rightfully so, you would imagine how every national paper would love to know about cabinet disagreements. It makes great news. It's exciting to watch as gossip, all that kind of stuff. So what we really need to do is look at how we balance that in Canada between, on the one hand, you have this secrecy. It's not designed to keep secret what is happening in government. We need to be open and transparent within reason. Certainly, there's things that have national security implications. A lot of the stuff I look at, you don't want everybody knowing that, because if it's in the Global Mail, our potential adversaries could read those things. So we'll learn that. But also the freedom to be able to debate. Clearly, the reason you go in camera is so that everyone can then have a vigorous and possibly heated debate to get the best answer. And so that's why we have that element of secrecy in that regard. But when it comes to actual decisions that are taken, actual expenditures, the rollout of these policies, that should be open. And that is information that folks can get when it comes to the actual execution of the policy. So debating which direction to go, that specifically happens in secret so that they can have a robust decision. But when it's set, it rolls out um, in a way that is the government itself. Once the direction's set, the civil servants put that into practice, and you can know all kinds of things about that and read all kinds of documents about what is being done. And that is something that citizens, if we use that kind of company analogy or nonprofit analogy, as the shareholders, they have a right to know that, but they don't have a right to be sitting at the board table listening to two or three different board members having a vigorous debate because you just can't have that. There's the Privy Council oath actually that you if you ever watch the signing in for ministers, they have to give an oath to do two things. And I don't remember the exact words off the top of my head, but one of them is that if they have an opinion, they have to share it. So if they don't agree with something or they have an opinion, they do it, they swear an oath or they solemnly affirm that they will share it and that they will keep those discussions secret so that they both enable each other. So that's the idea. It's not a secret cabal. It is a vigorous debate that's enabled by that level of respect for the folks there. And that's sort of self-regulated by the fact that we are pretty good about most politicians can't go too far off of their electoral promises because they'll get punished right away. There's all kinds of great promise trackers out there. That's what the opposition is there for, is to criticize the government. So as soon as you go against what you said you do in an election, you do find yourself having to justify yourself to the media, to Canadians, to the opposition. And for the most part, governments are held to account that way. So it's a balancing act between all of these aspects to try and create an effective government. No government is perfect, but our system is trying to balance these aspects of being able to get things done, being open and being democratic, and get that to a state of peace, order, and good government is what we in Canada traditionally have tried to go for.
That was awesome. I love that. And you know what? Again, every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and you have such a great way of explaining it. So, to finish up, if someone is watching this who is never really gotten involved in elections, never really gotten involved in politics, say they don't understand it, um, what should they be doing at this point? What do you want to see voters doing as we head into the next election, the next set of campaigns, or to just get informed on government?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. First off the bat is that if you're done the first step by listening to this video, watching it, learn more about how the system works. I'm still learning day by day. I taught a course in winter 2025 that was like Canadian foreign policy. So I had to learn all kinds of stuff, all the little inner details of how the cabinet works. So everyone's learning. So continue your learning journey about it. And I would say you don't need to have a perfect understanding of everything. Get involved and ask your members what they think. If things are important to you, advocate for that. And if you hit the wrong door, well, certainly it's not off the mark, even for different levels to lobby each other. So if you're not happy, say, with Chinese tariffs on agriculture products, you should be talking to your member of parliament because it's a federal issue. But you can talk to your member of the legislative assembly to ask the province, to ask the federal government to resolve that. Certainly, it's more important to research the issues, find out what's important to you, and communicate it. And don't feel discouraged. Even folks who are in what we might call yellow dog ridings, where you feel you could run a yellow dog, you could run a post, and they'll still elect that person, that party person. They respond to that feedback, and they got to take that up into what's important. If you take the time to email your member, yeah, maybe it's not the member responding, maybe it's the staff member, but if you don't think they're putting that in some database to say, hey, gosh, we're getting a lot of emails about this issue, we should probably have a response for that. Like that, they will do that. And as Spruce Woods has put out here, you can see that just because the writing seems safe, those change over time. And so, never hesitate to get involved one way or another, whether it's if you feel very aligned to an issue or to a party, get involved. And if you're just a citizen who's got concerns, reach out to your member, tell them about it, make an appointment with them, get on the phone. They will listen to you because if you are talking about it, odds are there are hundreds of people who care about it too, and they will take that seriously. You won't always get the result you want, but you build it over time. So don't be intimidated, learn a little bit more day by day, get involved. And that's what our system is built on. It's built on citizens who are not necessarily getting it perfect, but they're engaged, they're doing their best, and they're engaging the process with the spirit of just trying to have our country and our province be better.
Awesome. That's a perfect way to end this. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining me and helping us inform and educate myself and my listeners on government policy, parties, all of this stuff. And we're going to continue. So everybody out there who's really enjoyed this, we're going to continue these discussions because I don't want to see politics and government only be discussed during elections. We need to understand, we need to get involved, and we need to get informed. And regardless of the issue, regardless of what position you take on an issue, you need to find the representative that supports you and your views and your values. And I think that's really, and it doesn't matter. We're all different and you're you. I can't tell you, what you believe in and what's important to you. Only you can do that. And find your local representative that speaks to that and get involved. And I think that's really important. I don't want to hear anybody saying that, I don't do politics, because politics does you. Politics is involved in everything, from your healthcare to your school to the roads you drive on. So let's keep the conversations going. Chris, again, thank you for being here, and everybody else, I'll see you next time on Real Talk. That's it for this episode of Real Talk, where we tackled the hardest conversations because they're the ones we need the most. I can't wait to hear your thoughts and opinions. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay real, stay engaged, and keep living your authentic truth.